Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Skip Sorrels, Director of Cybersecurity with Ascension Health. I'm Anthony Guerra, Founder and Editor-in-Chief. Skip, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Anthony. Pleasure to be here.
All right, very good, Skip. Let's start off. Tell me a little bit about your organization and your role.
So I I work for the infrastructure arm of Ascension Health, known as Ascension Technologies, and we about 5,000 people that make up the infrastructure teams. But as a whole, Ascension Health is anywhere from 130,000, 150,000 employees, 2,500 plus locations across the United States, and depending on which metric you look at on any given day, in the top three largest nonprofit healthcare providers in the United States. So, got a little bit
Okay.
of a
Uh,
sprawl there.
yeah, a little bit. Okay. Okay. Any idea how many hospitals? Just out of curiosity, not a big deal if you don't know. Approximately?
The locations are all considered patient care centers, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're hospitals. I think the hospital counts around 125, 130.
That's big. That'll do it, right?
Yes,
Big
sir.
place. All right, very good. So Ascension Technologies is technically a company, correct? Sort of technically its own entity in a sense.
I believe so. From
Oh,
a finance book standpoint, I believe that's correct.
okay. So you provide services to Ascension. Do you provide services to any other health systems?
No, no,
Okay.
we're a wholly owned subsidiary, if you will.
Okay. So just one customer. You got one big customer.
Correct.
I
That's right.
wonder if that type of dynamic, you know, so a lot of health systems don't have that sort of separate entity, but we always, use the terminology and want to treat our users like customers in a sense, and we're a service department. Sort of being a little more technically your own entity, does that help foster a customer dynamic, you think?
I think it absolutely does, because everyone that has an association to what Ascension Health is about is has a heart for the mission, the mission of the hospital and the organization, the care of the poor, and care of those in need. So we're all aligned with that, and a clinician in the organization is a peer to me. It doesn't matter what it says on the paycheck or what budget my money comes from. We're all in it together for the care of people.
Do you think it's sort of technical reasons? Or are there any advantages to being sort of somewhat of a separate entity as opposed to not? I mean, any thoughts there on why to do it or why not to do it? They may be technical, legal reasons that have nothing to do with the actual work or providing the service that are sort of beyond at least my interest or understanding. Or there may be some practical reasons. Maybe when you get to a certain size, it makes sense to do this. Any thoughts there?
I'll be honest. I never have thought about it.
Okay.
I think, having grown up in the hometown of Walmart, and watched how they develop things, and they have a real estate division, and they have a facilities division, and they have so they have all these wholly owned subsidiaries. And I would, based on that background, think that there is financial reasons for a separation of duty
Hmm.
and the budgets. But as far as Ascension goes, I honestly don't know.
Okay, well, listen, it's an interesting point. Like I said, it probably a lot to do with legal and taxes and God knows what, and things that I'm very have a limited understanding for, but respect people who do, certainly. All right, so let's um let's just start big picture, sort of what are you thinking about these days? What kind of trends are you watching? What's top of mind?
Obviously, the buzz is, artificial intelligence. I think it's out there. We've got to be cognizant of it, and We have to, in my mind, figure out how to embrace it for our betterment in terms of cyber defense strategy, automation of workflows, whatever we could come up with. But that's not the thing that keeps me up at night. Nothing really does. I shouldn't say that. I sleep pretty good, but if I wake up, my brain is usually thinking about something very basic, very fundamental. Um, Patch management, vulnerability management, securing our perimeter. What do we have technologically that's exposed to the internet that may have a chink in the armor, so to speak, that the enemy, so-called enemy out there is looking for to take advantage of. So I showing my age, former Dungeons and Dragons kid, I think in terms of castles and moats. And I try to use that analogy as, defense and layers, right? You've got the moat, you've got the tar, you've got the spikes, you've got the wall, you've got the door, the drawbridge, each layer of defense. And so when I think in terms of cyber, I think that way. It's what's at the most exterior. How do we ensure that we're protected? And then step in a layer and go from there. And all of that really boils down to the CIS controls. I don't know that anyone can ever perfect 1, 2, and 3 to say that they've gone beyond that with any semblance of perfection or absolution. It's just not possible. Things change. Inventory is key. If you don't know what you don't have, then you can't protect it. So um, I really do try to settle myself into the fundamentals and shy away from the shiny new things. I don't believe in silver bullets. I believe in understanding the context and use case and really understanding the details. We can solve pretty much anything with technology if we understand the requirements, the limitations, and our own capabilities.
All right, very good. So let's go into that a little bit. So you sleep pretty well, which is great. And I want to actually, in a serious sense, I want to talk a little bit more about that because I think there's a lot of cyber professionals who don't. I want to try and
Right.
figure out what are some of the reasons they might not. Maybe we can help them. But let's first start with the idea that, you're sort of a cyber hygiene guy focusing on the basic blocking and tackling. I hear that a lot. It makes a lot of sense. Um, you're trying to think, what did I miss? What's out there that I didn't see? What's hanging out there that's dangerous, that exposed to the internet? What are some of the ways that, when you get into the office after pondering that you try and go about finding those holes?
So you can work from the outside in or the inside out. So from the outside, you can utilize technologies that scan your perimeter, no different than a cyber threat or hacker would do. There's all sorts of open source tools. There's all sorts of paid tools that can be leveraged to look at your IP ranges exposed to the internet. Just like basically think of it as an external vulnerability scanner, looking for holes in the armor. From the inside out, back to the inventory. I believe that IP addresses and NATed IP addresses are a form of inventory, and you have to understand what that IP space and range looks like, and then understand your DMZ and your pathway from the inside out or outside in, so that you can tie off on that and really assess what's going on and hopefully find systems that aren't necessarily as secure at all and fix it, get them off the internet or put controls in place to secure them.
So when you're talking about inventory, are we talking, we thinking mostly devices, or are we thinking in terms of, biomedical devices, pumps, things like that, or are we thinking applications as well? Are we thinking both?
Everything.
Hmm.
CS Control 1 would be hardware, 2 is your software and your applications. And I throw IP addresses in there because they're not a tangible asset, but they're relevant to the hardware, where it sits and how it communicates. And you need to understand it's just like the mailbox in front of the house on the country road, right? And so knowing that address, where it exists, means that you also then have to understand how to protect it if somebody pulls up in the driveway. So I think about our perimeter in that regard.
So if you have a sound procurement process to where everything being purchased, new applications, new devices is coming through security in a sort of a formal way, does this problem get, mitigated quite a bit? And the problem where it comes up a lot will be if many applications and devices are coming into the organization without security being informed. You talk about inventory, right? How do we get our arms around an inventory if new inventory keeps coming in and we don't know about it? So talk about that dynamic.
Sure. The establishment of a risk assessment or a technical assessment at the beginning of the procurement process is imperative because you want to identify the need of an organization or the want. They're bringing it forward for financial approval. Before they can gain approval, it has to pass enterprise architectural reviews, make sure it falls within a reference architecture or a standard. So, in order to control um, the destandardization of an organization, you have to follow a standard. So you want to eliminate things coming in that deviate from a said standard. You want to understand the risk, and so to your point, having a system that puts a placeholder in your database once the finances are approved and the order is placed, so that you have a reconciliation point when it arrives at the dock or into the facility. And you can say, I was expecting one of these and I got one of these. Now I have a life beginning of an asset. So that cradle aspect of it. And then the same thing with applications. The procurement process is the front door to understanding what may or may not come into the environment and be able to catalog that into a database as your inventory going forward.
It's not easy to get that governance in place, to get that culture of it's got to go through security. You're in a massive organization. I'm sure things are popping up left and right and all the time. You used a really cool word that I like a lot, the destandardization, which to me is that's a horrifying place to be as a health system, right? We don't want to go there because that's everything spinning out of control. We want standardization, controls, everything's got to be reviewed. But I want you to talk about um, moving towards standardization and starting to ingrain process and culture in the organization so they understand the importance of coming through IT security and your exceptions become rarer.
So I think the challenge in healthcare, and I think I can say this honestly, having been a clinician, having been a trauma critical care nurse for several years, physicians and clinicians historically have their favorites. The medical device or the tool or the instrument that they prefer, no different than a mechanic likes, Snap on or Craftsman, right? And so when you take that into consideration and you look at what's happened over time, often in healthcare you have a lack of standards. You've got a little bit of everything everywhere. And in order to rationalize that, I think the key is a form of governance that has to be established that utilizes the clinical peers. So the physicians in radiology, the physicians in cardiology that lead the organization and set the tone are the ones that should weigh in on what the standard should be based on tools, diagnostics, medical devices, etc. And if you can establish that, then you give them the choice. And hopefully, we're not there yet, but I would like to see us someday be to a single or no more than dual source vendor model where we have no more than 3 or 4 model versions of a particular, say, x-ray machine or a particular ultrasound. And there's a couple of reasons, several reasons actually behind it that kind of go uh, without consideration or not thought about. Standards decrease support overhead cost. Standards drive up the ability to negotiate better deals. Now let's talk about how it impacts your staff. In this world we live today, we are short staffed even more than we ever were in the clinical space. And they're looking for creative ways, not just our organization, healthcare in general, to shift staff to locations to load balance the need for care in those facilities based on census. If you take me as a nurse from one ICU to the other and the equipment is different, I'm going to have a learning curve. I'm going to have some roadblocks and some limitations to my ability to jump into that job and be effective. And so standards also help in regard to the mobilization of clinicians across multiple footprints of an organization so that you can load balance staff potentially with the least amount of disruption.
That's really, really great stuff. That concept of, I guess, in every area, every type of device related to its clinical usage, to get it down to a few choices as opposed to whatever you want, right? So
Mhm.
that's a process of IT and IT security having conversations with clinical leaders and explaining the why, and here's where we want to go, here's why, and in relation to the current state. So there's always a current state, right? There may be in a particular niche, there may be 6 applications currently in use in a particular area, and you want to have that conversation with that clinical leader to say, we would like to get down to 2 or 3. Um, and obviously, you talk about people being tied to their favorite tool. I interviewed a CISO the other day who talked about how it's so much harder than you think to get anyone to give up their favorite tool. So application rationalization is really, really hard when you get down to it. And she said her goal, she had a goal, and the project was much slower than she had hoped. She had hoped to reduce by a certain amount per year. It maybe got 30% of that because when the rubber hits the road, nobody wants to give up their tool. Your thoughts around that?
Well, listen, I'll be the first to admit I'm a creature of habit, and I like my things, right? And I had my favorites when I was at the bedside too. A particular monitor over another or whatever, right? We all have our favorite pens and pencils for crying out loud. So when I think of application rationalization, there is a it feels right, it feels good because that's the way I've always done it. On the backside of that, uh, I would say the challenge in healthcare is often a lack of life cycle management. What I mean by that is we've got applications in our environment that have exceeded their useful life, meaning they're typically not supported and can't be patched. So I'm speaking from a security lens, looking at how applications get to where they are. And we're a budget constrained environment. And so we tend to, wear the wheels off the car before we change them. And applications are no different. And so I think it's quite frankly less of the favorite thing and more of a money driven behavior where we have to make do with what we have. And unfortunately, where we sit today, security is right in the middle of that. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, not so much. It wasn't really considered like med devices and applications. Yeah, security patch this, whatever. It just didn't have the attention that it has today, rightly so. So I think for and I'm speaking outside of healthcare now because I've lived in IT for 20 plus years, 30, I guess. Gosh, I'm getting old. Um, Apps rationalization is one of the hardest things to do because you're attempting to collapse what already exists and do it without disruption or disfavor. It's you can't make everybody happy. And so as you are decommissioning an application, you're also having to, leave the ship and head to the other one through the lifeboat. So that transition period, that organizational change management becomes key, so that you lessen the disruption, you set the expectation, and hopefully you've trained your staff adequately to move to the new system, so you can jettison the old. Uh, that's not an easy process. If we didn't have people, we wouldn't have problems. Is one of the things I say. And so, if it was just a technology swap, no big deal, right? But we have human beings involved, especially in healthcare, so we have to be aware of that.
Right. That all makes perfect sense. So we know application rationalization, it's something we would love to do. It's really, really hard. But having said that, understanding how difficult it is to get rid of something makes us much more cautious and careful about what we bring in. Is that
Absolutely,
true? Because now that we know the effects of um, destandardization, back to your word, we know the effects of that. We want to keep that from happening. So now, when it comes through IT and IT security, we want to do everything possible to try and convince you to either work with what you have or work with what another part of the organization has, or stay within that reduced suite of 2 or 3 products. And we want to do everything possible to keep you from picking that one-off mom and pop, right?
that's right. Yeah, uh, the the getting something into the organization through the different gates that I discussed earlier, pre-procurement assessments, architectural reviews, security reviews, etc., are really key going forward, especially now. Um, Gosh, when back in I was in the last time I did nursing was like 1988 or 99, and this was at the dawn of the electronic medical record. Everything we did was pen and paper, old school. And as I began to see the EMRs and the technology come along, it was fascinating to think about where we would be. Well, guess what? Here we are in the future, and I'm looking back going, wow. And it's even more important now, today, in the last 5 years alone, looking at the evolution of applications and security and the threats that come our way. It's often overwhelming, and it does make it difficult to get your arms around it. But I think the importance of that, again, going back to having standards and limited quantities of things, benefit many in the long run. Again, you got to set the expectations and have people buy in and understand why it's important.
Very good. All right. So you said that you were a critical care nurse. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
that's really interesting. In terms of, I'd like to discuss how that I am sure that having had that experience helps you be a better cyber leader. And the same CISO I was referring to before spoke about the importance of cyber individuals knowing operations, and she instituted rounding, 10 hours of required being out in the field and rounding for everybody in cyber, so they would know what sort of operations they're supporting. And you understand the criticality better, perhaps, if you've been out there, of something being down. You have a better understanding of what it means when this is down. But your thoughts around, how it's helped you be a better cyber leader, your clinical experience, and if you agree that it's super important for cyber folks to really get out there and see what's going on.
I absolutely think it's helped me in this role. I absolutely have a heart for the clinicians that struggle with technology because it's not providing them what they expected at the time they need it. And it's not just, I honestly can say to a clinician that's very frustrated, look, I've been in your shoes, and I've had those conversations. They're like, no, you haven't. I go, hold up a second. I used to be in the ICU. I know. I really do mean this genuinely. I understand what it means to have these challenges and these downtimes. It's terrible. It's hard. the fact that technology in healthcare has become a force multiplier for the clinicians. What I mean by that, back when I was in the ICU, you couldn't handle more than two patients. It was
Mhm.
impossible. That was the patient to nurse ratio. Now it's much greater than that. But the reason for it is because we have the technology that gives them the visibility from a remote location down the hall, or whatever the means by which to monitor, to take care of those patients. If something goes down, that force multiplier goes away. And now we have some problems and some challenges. So I absolutely can relate wholeheartedly to the clinician's work and the level of stress, and how hard it is when things don't go well. I also, I was trying to think of your second part of the question in terms of rounding.
Yeah.
We do the same. We do encourage and want our people to be in the healthcare um, theater, if you will, walking the halls, doing rounding, having an understanding. More importantly, having a relationship. Have a relationship with people so that when there is a problem, they don't see a strange face they don't understand with frustration, going, "Who's that person in here? Get them out," as opposed to, "Oh, that's the person that can help me. I know them. They come around all the time. We've got a great relationship." So I think building the relationships, forming the understanding and the communication, educating one another to the frustrations through that visibility and experience is extremely important in healthcare and in healthcare cybersecurity.
Yeah, great points. Great points. So, folks should really get out there and around because, as you said, when you're dealing with users and they're frustrated, you're able to say to them, "I've been in your shoes." So, for folks that have not come up through the clinical side, you at least want to be able to say, "Hey, I've spent a lot of time out here in the field, and I'll tell you exactly what I've done." And that'll probably change their tone with you. If you say, I've spent this many hours and or even better, like to what you were alluding to, we've met. So I've been out here in the field. So
Right.
they're gonna have a much different tone in that conversation, right?
Absolutely.
All right, very
It's
good.
hard.
So, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's harder to get mad at somebody that you've broken bread with. So,
Hmm.
you know, sharing a meal sometimes, and the relationship that comes from that is, yeah, you have a lot more grace for one another. So again, relationships are extremely important.
Yeah, great way to put it. Having grace for each other. Great way to put it. We only have a couple minutes left. Goes fast. I do want to go back to that up at night concept. Um, I do think that you know it's a tough job. I was speaking to one of CIOs I'm friendly with, who said he thinks it's the toughest job out there. CISO type work and the type of work you do, director of cybersecurity. Um, because it's tough. It seems like it could be quite stressful, and it would be difficult unless you had this worked out how you're going to do this mentally. It would be difficult to disengage, and that you could sort of eat yourself up thinking about it, worrying about it. What am I missing? When's it coming? When am I getting that notification that we've been hit by ransomware? And is it all going to be on me? Is my job on the line when something goes down? That whole up at night concept. So for those that are having trouble with that and are up at night, what's your best advice for them?
You got to have a hobby. My dad used to ask me out of college. He knew I worked my tail off because I was trying to pay off student loans, and I was excited because I had money in my pocket. But he'd always say, "How are you doing?" We talk a little bit, and his next question would be, "What are you doing for fun? What are your hobbies?" And that was his way of saying, "Hey, I really respect what you're doing, but you got to have time for yourself." And so I would say that to anybody that asks me, you have to intentionally have time for yourself where you can disconnect. Um, I spent this weekend working on one of my Jeeps. It was therapeutic. It was awesome. Cell phone wasn't near me. Had the radio going. Oil in my fingers. Just mad as a hornet at certain things because they weren't going my way. But at the end of it, I went, "Hey, I did that, and I had the mental break, and it was completely different than thinking through cybersecurity, the stress of it." albeit a different form of stress, right? I'm not a mechanic by trade, but I felt like I could do it myself. So give it a shot.
I think that's brilliant advice. I totally agree with you. Something that you could sort of lose yourself in, right? That
Right.
you enjoy and you can lose yourself in, and it creates that mental break. You don't need to, it's impossible to turn your mind off, right? You don't get to flip the switch off, but you can make it go somewhere else where it's a more pleasant place to be for a while, right?
I agree. Absolutely agree.
Brilliant, brilliant. Any other final word of advice, other than that for your colleagues, things that you found that have made you successful? Any kind of final parting piece of advice?
Take a bath, hygiene, cyber hygiene.
Cyber hygiene.
I think fundamentals are key. I'm asked a lot, what are the technologies of today and tomorrow? Well, they're going to be fantastic, but the reality is you got to stick to your fundamentals. You got to do your basic blocking and tackling. And in healthcare, we don't have the budget or the luxury of going after the really cool shiny thing, right? We have to be very diligent. Typically, when we get something new, it's because we're replacing something and leaving it behind. It's not a net new ad. And so all of that to say, be careful in your thought process. Don't get overly zealous with silver bullets. Stick to your hygiene. And cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. It's not just mine or my team's. It's everybody out there in the world. Quite frankly, we see it in our banking. We have a PIN we have to enter. We've got dual factor authentication. We don't think about those things when we're in healthcare, but it's the exact same security posture you have at your bank. So I use those analogies a lot when people are frustrated because we institute something new, and I'll say, "Well, what do you do with your bank? You got a phone, right? Does it text you? Does it email you and say, can you please confirm with this PIN?" Well, yeah, we're doing the same thing. It's no different. So I think you just take a step back, take a deep breath, focus on the fundamentals, try not to get too wound up about things, and enjoy what you do, but know that everybody's got to play a part.
Awesome, Skip. That was wonderful. I think people are really going to enjoy it. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I appreciate it.